Um, Sorry for that. My hair's doing something weird. All right, so we're getting started today. I'm going to be finishing up the Maryland wallet today. So we should get through that. Attaching our zipper to our wallet, and then attaching the main outer piece, which will make your zipper pocket for the coin pocket. Um, so far, so if you haven't done it before, this is the Maryland wallet. It's by Lance Handmade. It's one of my favorite wallet patterns. It's what I actually carry myself. So the pieces we have left, we have our zipper tabs, our zipper. Of course, I'm dropping pieces. I have my Peltex that goes in the body of the wallet. I have my linings for my zipper pocket. You can see there's two of them. We have the flap that I made in the first week for the turn lock. It is installed, it is glued. Then I have the exterior main piece. As you can see, it's rounded. This is where the other side of the turn lock will go, but we won't do that till the very end of the video right here. And the parts that we have put together mostly last week, we have the card slots. So you have your ID window right here. Like I said, this is one of my favorites because, and so I put, if you can see it, I put the hole right here so I can push up my wallet. I also have a little groove right here so I can grab my ID very easily and pull it out because it does like to stick to the clear vinyl. And there are 10 card slots. So if you see one, two, three, four, and then there is one behind the ID wallet. So technically you fit six on this side if you count the ID window. And then there are five on this side. And then they open up and there's your pockets. And it is big enough to fit money unfolded in it. Sometimes I fold it, sometimes I don't. I have other cards. And then you have your pen pocket right here. So just to show you, let me grab a pen or a pencil, slide it in there right there. All right. So today we're going to be putting our wallet together. Basically, what's left is to add the flap to here, and then we're going to put our zippers on the zipper on for the change purse part of the wallet, and then we are going to put it all together, and then put the second part of welcome, the second part of the turn lock, which is, I was about to say, where did I put it? The other part of the turn lock. So just to show for those who are not familiar with a turn lock, you have the piece that will close your wallet, and this will not open now. But when it's unlocked, it just slides right out. All right, so the first part today is that you need to make sure you have the center marked here on the side without the curved edges. And make sure you mark your center. And as I've said before, I usually mark using Sharpie in the seam allowance because it's not going to be erased or anything like that. So I've marked my center. And then I grab my flap, and so you can see up here that I've marked up here at the center. And I will actually, and you want to make sure that you have the inside of the wallet facing up, and then you put the flap with the top part facing up. If you do it face down, then your thing's going to be backwards when you try to put your wallet. So trust me, you will actually put it like this. You're going to match up your center markings and clip it together. Now, this is a part that I use clips instead of pins because it's just thicker because you've got the Peltex that's in the flap from previously. Apparently dropping clips. All right, and one more clip. Let's make sure we're centered. All right, we're centered. So if you can see, there's about a 1/2 inch on each side. And this is what will be our seam allowance when we close up the wallet. So you want to make sure you have an equal distance on both sides. What we're going to do is we're going to use 1/8 of an inch seam allowance and baste that together. And so I'm going to take y'all to the sewing machine. Okay. All right, so we're just going to baste this together. And for those who've not watched on my channel before, I am lining it up to the edge of my foot because it is a narrow foot and that is exactly 1/8 of an inch. So I can just line the edge of my fabric up with the edge of my foot, and that's 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And as I've said before, it does say based, but if it's going to be in my seam allowance, then I'm going to go ahead and backstitch so it doesn't come undone while I'm adding the next part. Welcome. All right, so the next part is to add the zipper, but before we add the zipper, wherever I put there it fell off, we are going to add our zipper tabs to our zipper. So we have our zipper, and we are going to secure that. You can use pins or clips. With this, I will just use my hands and hold it in place. And this is sewn. I believe it's a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I will double check my pattern just to make sure. Better safe than sorry. Yep, 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, so we're going to sew that on there. Okay, so we have sewn that on there. So then what we're going to do is we're going to fold it back and we're going to top stitch it at 1/8 of an inch. Right. And then we'll do the same to the other side. And this is why you make sure your zipper pull is already on there so that you don't forget it. Because otherwise you're going to have to do some seam ripping. And we do, so like I said, make sure you reverse stitch at the beginning and end of that. Okay. So we are going to top stitch that side. Okay. I'm going to trim my threads on the underneath from where I started and stopped. Trim the one on top. Okay. So now we have our completed zipper. So we have our zipper tabs. So what the first thing we're going to do is we're going to mark our centers. So what you're going to do is line up the edges of your zipper tape And you're going to mark your centers on both sides of the zipper tape. This will come and be important later. To make sure everything lines up. So now we're going to line this up here, and we're going to go right sides together because this is your flap, and your zipper you're going to put right sides together so that when you have your zipper, that's how it will look up against your flap. So you're going to make sure your centers match up and then just clip it again. Now, one thing you will notice is that the zipper tabs stick out past this. Um, in the instructions, it actually says to trim these off. I actually go ahead and baste it together, then I trim it just so that it doesn't move and I know it's the exact and I don't accidentally cut off more than I need. So I will baste it together with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance again. And I will have to move my zipper pull over a little bit to get by it. Okay, so we've basted that. So now what I will do is I will hold that down and I will trim off the excess, even with the side of the wallet. And I will do that on both sides. Okay. So our next thing we're going to add is we are actually going to do one of the pieces of lining, and we're going to mark our center yet again. And you previously could have gone ahead and marked all your centers for all your pieces. I do sometimes I mark it as I go. It's just whatever you're most comfortable with. So I just fold it in half to mark my center, and I line it up right side to the wrong side, the right side of the lining to the wrong side of your zipper. Okay. We're going to clip that down. I'm actually going to zip my zipper out of the way a little bit, and then I'll zip it back down afterwards. Now, this is attached using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So you definitely will have to move your zipper out of the way. Okay, so we just go a little bit at a time. Now that I've reached that halfway point, I'm going to zip my zipper to the other end of the zipper tape so that it won't be in my way when I get towards the end. Okay. Now at this point, what we're going to do is take our lining and you can take and press it. I usually just kind of pull it taut as I'm sewing, and we're going to top stitch right below that seam line, an eighth of an inch. Your zipper pull shouldn't be an issue at this point, but if it is, just move it out of your way as you're stitching. All right, just to show that we have our lining. So this is what you'll see on the inside of the zipper pocket is that. So I'm going to attach the other lining and main. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to mark my center yet again for this one. I'm also going to grab my main and mark the center on that as well. Now make sure when you're doing that that you want the part that is not the rounded edge, because the rounded edge will be basically what is opposite your flap and the side that we're going to put the turn lock on. So that is not what's going to be up against the zipper. All right, so I have marked both my main fabric and my lining fabric. And now in this case, what I do is I actually take the lining first and I match up my centers. And now in this case, I like using pins just because actually my preference is pins over clips a lot of times, unless the bulk is there or if you're showing vinyl. So I'll just put a few pins down and I'm not going to actually stitch I'm going to base the lining on, which is at an eighth of an inch seam allowance. All right, there we go. So this is, if you want to know how to put that together, you put it right sides together with the other lining piece, or wrong sides, the wrong side of the zipper, the other side of the zipper to the right side of the lining piece. And as I said, I usually do a reverse stitch because this is in the seam allowance. So who's going to know except for you that it's there, and it just keeps things um, less likely they come undone. So we're just doing an eighth of an inch base all the way across. Okay. We're going to trim that. So if you can see how the pocket will look together. So we will take our, and I will actually go ahead and slide my zipper pull down here because I'm going to start at this end, at the other end. So I want my zipper out of the way while I'm sewing at least the first part. So I'm going to match up my centers again. Make sure that's good and lined up. Now we'll use a couple more pins this way because this is not basting, this is my actual stitch. So sometimes I will use a few more pins just to make sure things stay together a little better. Apparently I'm pulling off. I've got a lot of stray threads around here today because I've been sewing a bunch of project bags for an order, or stow and go bags if you've followed me. Lots of cardinals. So I will get that good and pinned up. Set a few more pins just to make sure it doesn't shift. So just to show it's right sides together with the zipper. So I will take this and sew this together at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so we're attaching this. When I get to that halfway mark, I'm going to go ahead and move my zipper pull back to the other end. Just so that it's out of the way and I don't forget to move it and then run into it. I don't want to be right on top of it. So I usually try to move it out of the way while I'm sewing one way or the other. Okay, I will trim that. Just double check something on the. I've made tons of these, but sometimes I still like to double check certain parts. Now, for this last part, whereas in the previous layer we only top stitched through the lining, we are now going to top stitch through both the main and the lining. So we will actually pull that out. So if you see, there's our zipper. And we've got our lining. And like I said, you can take this to the ironing board and press. And I do sometimes, but if I think I can just hold it and top stitch, I'll do that too. Okay. So I'm just making sure that both are pulled very taut at the seam. And I will sew an 1/8 of an inch below the seam line. Make sure you reverse stitch. So noticing this, there was a little bit more of that zipper tab I can trim off that I did not make small enough the first time. Just a little bit of a, like an 1/8 of an inch trim back down. So now is the point that we are going to make this into a wallet. So you have, this is our exterior and this is our interior and here's our flap. So you see how that flap being right side up on top of the interior is why you want it that way, because that is where your zipper is. Just so I can show you. So now at this point, you want to open this zipper. And this is because otherwise you're going to close it up and you're going to have no way to turn it if you don't have your zipper open. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to, first things first, we're going to match up our seams that are here on the side. That's usually what I do. When you fold it, you want to make sure that your zipper tab, in other words, this part right here, is folded towards your lining. You don't want it folded towards your main or it won't lay right. So we are going to make sure our seams line up. And I'm going to take a clip and clip that because this is a very thick part. And then I'm going to do that on the other side as well. Thank you, Melody. Just getting to wonder if you were here tonight. But so we have our zipper tab yet again. Make sure the tab points towards the lining. And then we line up our seams. And I will put a clip there. Now, if you notice, oops, didn't mean to do that. I when I clipped over here, I actually clipped part of the lining down with the seam. Right, so now we have that. So we are going to, and it's okay if your lining pieces are slightly off. I understand that. I've been taking a lot of Benadryl. I had an allergic reaction to a medicine yesterday. So I've been trying to stave off itching. So I do understand tired. So we're going to first pin our lining pockets, pocket linings, not lining pockets, pocket linings. Now, as far as that little excess, we can trim that off, but that's not important right now. So now we're going to, if you notice, the rounded curves will match up. Now, the big thing, now, usually I use pins all the way down, except where I have the vinyl pocket for the ID window because you don't want holes in those pockets. So I will a lot of times either make sure I'm not where the vinyl pocket is to pin it in place. So now when I go down around the bottom where I know I can't avoid the vinyl pocket, I do use clips instead of pins, but I just prefer the stability of pins. That's my preference. Now, next week, y'all might be seeing me just working on a doll costume. I'm working on my stuff for the North Carolina State Fair, or at least once I finally finished an order I needed to get out. And once that's sent out, I will be working on that for the next 2 weeks so I can get it submitted by October 11th. So hopefully y'all don't mind sewing along with me as I sew a doll dress, and I can give y'all any tips or tricks that I have come about over the years. Now, for most of this wallet, we have used a 1/4 inch seam allowance. However, there is a little bit different with this. All right, so just to turn it around for a minute, just to talk about this for a second before I sew it. And next time you see me, I may have shorter hair. I'm trying to decide how much I want to chop off when I get my hair cut next week, but we'll see. We are actually going to sew at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and this is where you need to pay attention. So your flap is right here. It should be inside of or right outside that 1/2 inch seam allowance, but you need to make sure you don't sew through your flap when you're sewing this. Go as close to the flap as you can, but don't sew through your flap. But you're going to go starting in the lining. We're going to go and sew a 1/2 inch all the way till we get to this curve. Then we're going to go down and sew at a 1/4 inch seam allowance down across the bottom. And then you're going to gradually go back up to a 1/2 inch on the side up to the other side. And then we will flip it. So, well, it's all natural. This is my natural hair color. It's just getting to be heavy. This is probably the longest I've had it in a long time, but if I go short, it'll probably be like this short. So we'll see what I do. I'm not exactly sure. But yeah, I have lots of colors in my hair, including silver. So we're getting there and all that. But all right, but that's what we're gonna do right now. So we're gonna start on this side with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, go like around the curve, 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch, all the way across the bottom 1/4 inch, and then you're gonna go back up to a 1/2 inch. So you're going back 1/2 inch on the other side. So we'll go ahead and do that. Oh wow. I've had highlights, but I've never colored my hair, so that might happen eventually, but I like all the colors I have in my hair, so I don't know. Part of me's a little scared to make that kind of commitment. So, But my teenager has had purple, teal, pink. So I don't know what color I would go if I did it. All right, so we're going to put it at our 1/2 inch marking. And I'm promise I'm not trying to rush. This is just compared to the rest of the wallet, this is a pretty quick part. And like I said, I'm going right up against my flap, but I am not sewing through my flap. Another reason I love this narrow foot. It's like a zipper foot. And that's actually what she suggests in the pattern is that you use a zipper foot possibly to get as close to that flap as possible. But with my narrow foot, it's about the same thing. Mhm. And we are going around. And so as I get down here with the 1/4 inch seam allowance, I start rotating it and work my way down to the 1/4 inch, just slowly, one stitch at a time. That's usually the best way I've found to do it. And I'll show you what it looks like when we're done as far as that part. And when we get to the other side, we start working our way back up to the, and I do this slow and do one stitch at a time so that it is about where I want it. And sometimes I have to go back and redo the curves a little bit. I've had grayish hairs since I was 19. I've got more like little silver streaks, as my husband says, and they actually are silver. So I'm not doing anything to cover them up, but they're not very plentiful. Okay. And now, one thing you can do before you go past this one, I'm going to fix my curves. Um, this one's kind of wonky. So I'm going to take it and just go sew a little bit deeper curve right here. And yeah, I'll show you. I'm not going to actually seam rip the other because we're actually going to trim this seam. So that's not as much of an issue. It's still not quite where I like it. It's got a really sharp curve there. Okay. And then we're going to fix this. This has a really weird wonky curve. Now this one I actually will seam rip a little bit because this is where it was slightly wonky because how I went around the curve. So this is like pulling out 2 stitches here just so it doesn't have a weird curve. I don't have a lot of gray hair, my or silver hair, but my husband is mostly salt and pepper now, and we're both only 44. So, all right. So just to show, I have taken that part out. So just to show the curve, let's fix this over here. All right. Hi, Annette. Welcome. We have our little curve here that I fixed that so it doesn't have that weird indent. Here, I actually had to fix because I had gone too far over. It wasn't in the 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I fixed the curve and fixed it to go back into the 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to turn y'all this way for a minute. Now, the biggest thing here, reach your hand in here and make sure you didn't sew the flap in anywhere. Make sure that you can actually lift your flap like kind of up through your opening and that you didn't sew your flap. That's the biggest thing here. You're like, none there. Our flap is free, so you know you got that. So I'm gonna push it back in actually at this point, just so I can trim the seams. Now, one thing I do for trimming seams is I use a pinion shears. Now, when you get to the thick parts, you might need to use your regular scissors, but less likely it's going to fray using pinking shears. So I trim it down to about somewhere between an eighth and a quarter. Now, see if you see, this is the really thick part, that seam that has the zipper tab. So I have to kind of flinch a little bit to get over. And I said, if you have to correct your curve, unless it's on the inside of the curve where it would be seen, since this was on the outside of my curve, the original, I don't worry about it. The inside is fixed and you're never going to know. So I trim all the way around. And like I said, it's going through many layers, so it takes a minute. And like I said, I like to use pinking shears just because less chance that it will fray. They also make these type of pinking blades for rotary cutters, if you didn't know. Like I said, you can tell when I get to thick parts because I struggle a little bit. My arthritis in my hands don't like that. Okay, there's that last thick part. Now my lap looks fuzzy because all the stuff I just clipped off, but apparently I missed a piece of fabric and it just flew the other way. So now we've got it nice and trimmed down, like I said, around a quarter of an inch. So now what we're going to do is we're going to flip it. It's also great for getting around curves. It helps it lay better. Now, if I'm using vinyl, I will trim it down with regular scissors because sometimes pinking shears won't get through vinyl. And I have made this wallet with vinyl, but I will tell you, make sure that as you see the amount of turning you have to do, make sure you're using one that won't crease weird as you're putting it together. Oh, I use them all the time for curves. All right, so we are poking everything out. I got my little handy dandy tool. Poke out our curves down here at the bottom really good. And then the next part we make sure to poke out is actually our zipper tabs. Now, the reason we point it down, that curve, is so that when we do that, we have a nice pretty zipper that you point it towards the lining, that when you do it, you're going to have a nice pretty zipper tab right there. Now you can finger press it. Now I'm going to say one thing that Lynn's does not have in her pattern. She does not have you top stitch this to lay it flat. However, I do, and I will show you what I do. I've just found I like it so that, like, if you notice that there's things kind of rolling, I don't like when it rolls, the seam rolls. I like it to lay flat on me. But before you do that, before you do any of that, You have your piece of Peltex. If you notice, it's curved, just like our uh, main piece is down here. So what we're going to do is we're going to fold that up into thirds and stick it in our pocket. So we're not closing this up till the very end. This is the very last thing we do. And we are going to stick it in our wallet, the body of our wallet. And you can see me poke and prod things in my whole arm in this. I said that is not in this pattern to top stitch it, but that's something I do. And I'll show you where I top stitch. But make sure you put your Peltex in before you top stitch. Unlike the last wallet I did, I forgot it and I went, oh, need that for the magnetic snap. So I just trimmed it down a little bit and I didn't take out the top stitch. I just fit it in between the top stitch. So still works, but it's a little different. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start up here and I'm not going to go all the way up to the top. Does not work because of the bulk and the zipper tabs. If you can notice trying to go, that doesn't work very well. So I start probably about a half inch down and I will stitch all the way around and back to about a half inch down on the other side. Like I said, that is not in the pattern, but that's something I do to make it lay flat. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. So I'll move y'all back to the machine. Sorry, little water break. All right, so one thing I'm actually going to do. So if you ever have where it's really high up here, I'm actually going to start like this. And instead of doing my reverse stitch, I will do my reverse stitch in a second. I actually flip my wallet around and sew up to where I want it to be because of how thick it is. I can't do it that normal way. And now I do my reverse stitch back to where I started, and then I flip it back around. That's just a little cheat if it ever comes up. That's a way I get around that. And then I have a nice reverse stitch at the start. So I just top stitch 1/8 of an inch. And this is not affected anything fits in the wallet or anything like that. Like I said, I just like how much better it looks. Almost forgetting to turn said wallet as I get to the bottom. I think it just gives it a finished look. Yeah, it wasn't. It's like I've made this wallet many, many times. I was like, did I really just forget to put that there? But I was like, it's not going to affect the integrity that top stitch, and so I just didn't take the top stitch out and just cut the Peltex smaller, and it works. And it's what's in my pocketbook right now. You can tell I'm getting to the part that has the clear vinyl because it's wanting to stick to my machine that has the ID window, so it's not wanting to slide. So we are finishing top stitching all the way around. So if you ever have a seam that you're like, I need to sew up to a thick seam, you can actually start a little below it. Start your stitching turn your thing around so up to that point. And so see, I'm sewing right up to that point again, and I can reverse stitch and I'm done. And they're sewn about to the same level. And I will show you. Now, other than sewing up the zipper pocket, we are actually done sewing. So I will show you this. We're going to flip around because the next part is not sewing. So the next part, I'm having scraggly bits because I've been sewing cardinal fabric and it's all over those things. So if you see, we have our top stitch and you see I stopped about 1/2 inch on both sides because it just gets too thick there and too bulky. Excuse me. So our next thing is to figure out, well, where do I put the other half of my turn lock? So what we're going to do here is that the best thing to do is actually to, I find, to match up the seams. So if you see here, see I've got the seam right here on my card slots and right here, and see they match up. Now the best way to do this is actually fill the wallet to how full you're going to fill it. So because I have made this wallet many times, I line up those seams and then I scoot my main body down just a tad, because that way when I put my turn lock on, I want it to be where I have a little room to stuff it full. So I'm actually going to. So then what you need to do is figure out where your flap is folded down. And we're going to mark our center right here. Where is my Sharpie? Okay. Just to show, I have marked my little mark. That's my center. Now when you have a turn lock, now some of them will look like this and some will look like this. This is for like the very plain turn locks right here. It fits perfectly with those. Now, some of the bigger turn locks, like some of the Harry Potter turn locks, or I believe I have a Hello Kitty over here I could show you. Um, Not exactly sure where they're at the moment, but I have one somewhere. I may have put it up, but anyway, so we also have, like, I have a rainbow turn lock over here. But what I use to make sure that I'm centered is I will use the one that goes with the plain one and use one of the one that has lots of little slots here, match it up, and I say, I know this is there are 3 of these holes in between my 2 holes. So if you can kind of see uh so what I will take that, since that's the case, I will take this bigger one and put that center mark I just made down. And I know I can mark 2 over from that center mark will be where my prongs need to go through. So I'm done marking. So just to show you, and now if I were to put my washer for the turn lock over this, over my markings, they line up. It's hard to see for me to do that, but I'm actually going to take a pair of scissors. Now that Peltex, this is where that Peltex plays a part. We are actually going to stick our hand in here, which is why we haven't sewn it yet. And I usually take a seam ripper or good pair of scissors when I make my holes for my turn locks. and I poke it on that line I've just made. I'm actually going to use my seam ripper to get it started, just so I can poke a hole through the fabric and the Peltex for both of those marks. And I will take my little pair of scissors and push it through all the way. And with these little like 4-inch scissors, they are actually about the perfect length that if you push them all the way up, I have found they're about the same size as those prongs here. So just to show that they fit in there. Ta-da. Now I'm not closing my prongs yet because I want to put fray check. Let me grab my fray check, which I think is right over here on my table. Make sure you put fray check on, because you do not want this to come apart later because your fabric has decided to fray and all that stuff. So I am going to put my fray check on. You could wait for the fray check to dry. I don't normally. All right, so we have put our turn lock piece back in. Now, before you press your prongs flat, make sure you put your washer on your prongs. Oh, I couldn't live without fray check. I use it a lot. And sewer's aid when I do my embroidery machine. So now I've got my washer on. You can't see it because, well, I'm inside the wallet. But I pushed down both sides. I pushed it down for both of them. Now, one thing you're going to do before you do anything else, I'm going to close up the fray check so it doesn't dry out, which it will. And grab my handy dandy duct tape, which failed a minute ago. I have colorful duct tape. That doesn't matter. Nobody's going to see this but you. You're just going to get you a piece of duct tape. And this is to cover up the prongs so that they don't rip through your fabric. And it will be very durable. I've also used electrical tape. We're going to take and we're going to stick our hand down this pocket. This is why the pocket's the very last. It is fun duct tape. I like it. Sometimes I get fun duct tape. Sometimes I just have the silver. It's whatever I grab at the time. Grab the wrong one on the wrong side. All right, so we are going to stick our hand down between the Peltex and the interior. My duct tape does not fold over on itself. And we are going to put it over our prongs. And this is just so that it will not poke your fabric or rub at it or anything like that. So I'm just putting my hand in there and rubbing it closed. Now, one thing we'll do before we close it up, that pocket, is we are going to put that, make sure it looks good. Everything looks good there. And so now that that's the case, what we're going to do is we are going to take our pocket and we are going to turn in 1/4 inch. So it doesn't matter. So if you see that one piece was slightly longer than the other, it's just because of how it's attached. If you want to, you can trim that down so they're even. I don't usually bother. Actually, what I do is I fold down 1/4 inch on the slightly shorter side and I just fold the other down to match it. And this is closing it up. And so it's actually about like about 3/8 to a 1/2 inch on one side and 1/4 inch on the other. And I just pin it all the way across to close it up. And we are going to there's nothing wrong with having fun duct tape or washi tape or other types of tape if nobody's ever going to see them. you get to know that there's something funky in your bags that are going to be hidden from everybody else. Okay. So I do pin this because they like to move, especially since they are two slightly different lengths. Sometimes I'll have it where they end up being about the same length. Sometimes they're very off, but just so that you're folding them to where they're even. Right. So see, it's all pinned, and we're going to go sew that at a very scant eighth of an inch seam allowance to close up our pocket, and then we are done with this wallet. So I'm going to move y'all back to the sewing machine. All right. Now, I have people say, "Well, why do you put nice fabric on the inside of a pocket?" I said, "I'm still looking in the pocket." So sometimes I'll do fancy stuff like this for the pockets. Sometimes I'll do a very plain pocket. It just depends, especially if it's something. Now, this one's not for me. I've already made myself a Demon Slayer um, wallet, but time I was just doing cutting several Demon Slayer wallets at the same time, and I picked the one ended up liking better the more I looked at it. I like the print better. So I will tuck that in. All right. So we are officially done. So now our change pocket is done, and we have our wallet. Now it sometimes takes. My daughter made the comment. Right now, it takes a little bit of time for it to train. So you'll see it's kind of flapping up, but if you see, it's very in line with the sides, so it lines up very prettily. But as my daughter says, you open it and it's spring loaded at the moment. Once it is actually done like this for a while, it doesn't do it as much. And it's training, like you've got Peltex in here. So you're training it, and you're also training it what's right here in the Peltex. And so it'll take time for it to where she has one I made her that's Robin Hood that is she opens it and it still stays like this. So it just depends. It takes it a while, but so here's the finished one. So there's our zipper. So if you want to look at it from this angle, we have and this is actually part of one of the characters. The money trying to jump out, but we have a finished Marilyn wallet. Now there are ways that we could probably figure out where I can make sure this is right side up. I don't do it. The main thing is I want from the front that I want it to be right side up. I don't worry so much about the back. Like the um necessary clutch wallet actually has um alterations to where you can cut it at a certain part. And I think there are places in Lynn's Facebook group that people have made it where it can be directional both here and here. That's more trouble than I want to think about, as many as these as I make. But this is my favorite wallet pattern, probably the necessary clutch after that. I make a lot of those too. And I'll do one of those and I'll show you the difference of what you do for when you have a directional fabric for that one, and how you can change it. So every bit of it is directional and looks right. So we have our finished. So, like I said, next week you'll probably see me sewing a doll costume or something of the like, doing stuff for State Fair. I may be working on a quilted bag to put in the State Fair. I don't know what I'll be working on. So, y'all probably just be with me for about an hour while I'm sewing along. This is one of my favorite patterns to sew. It's a very quick pattern. Um, like I said, I usually do the flap first, even though that's not until like the middle of her instructions, because I like to put glue on the screws, and I want it to dry completely. And so I like to do that like the night before or the day before I do it. But otherwise, it's about an hour, 2 hours so. Helps if I hold it right side up. So we have our pin pocket, we have all our card slots, we have our ID window, then we can put money in both sides. Yeah, basically, y'all get to watch me just so I can tell y'all the different stuff I'm working on for that. But um, I will see y'all next Wednesday. Looking forward to next week.